the fine-tuning argument. It's an exercise in religious rationalization that falls apart under even the most cursory of rational evaluation. So, why do they use it? Why do they use any of these absurd philosophical rationalizations? Because it makes them feel good, of course. So, let's take a look at where it all goes so wrong. Coming up next. I was checking out Adherent Apologetics to see if he'd responded to my video, and I came across this one on the fine-tuning argument. So, I guess here we go again. This is an excellent example of why religious reasoning, if you can call it that, is so absurdly faulty. It simply assumes it's right without having to prove that it's right. Then it insists that all roads lead to their conclusions because feelings. And I'm sorry, but that's not now, nor has it ever been, how any of this works.
This video is going to cover the first premise of the fine-tuning argument for the existence of God.
Good luck on that, because the fine-tuning argument is a very poor argument indeed. It's another one of those cases where the religious point out the hits and ignore the misses so they can get to the position that they've held from the outset, rather than following the evidence to whatever conclusion is most rationally suggested. That's one of the most rational sins you can have. But I guess, by all means, go ahead, show us what you've got.
So, the fine-tuning argument typically goes like this. Premise 1. The fine-tuning of the universe is either due to law, chance, or design.
And that premise is fallacious for numerous reasons. First off, it assumes there is fine-tuning without having demonstrated it. That's just an assertion on the part of the theist, not a demonstrable fact. Secondly, it argues that there are only 3 possible explanations, which is a false dichotomy, or I guess false trichotomy in this case. There are as many explanations as there happen to be. The whole reason the religious do this, as with C.S. Lewis's liar, lunatic, Lord trilemma, is so that they can dispose of 2 explanations and just assume that the one left over, well, that has to be true, without actually defending that explanation on its own. But maybe I'm jumping the gun here, I don't know. So let's see where he goes with this.
Premise 2. It is not due to law or chance.
And there we go. Why isn't it due to law or chance? What is your reasoning? Where is your evidence? Well, of course, the theist has none. They just declare that it's not, so they can move on to their favorite explanation and not be bothered with pesky things like evidence, reason, or critical thinking. Talk about dishonest.
Premise 3. Therefore, the fine-tuning is due to design.
Which is not supported. Nothing in this argument is at all supported. It's just made-up nonsense done for emotional reasons in order to get to the conclusion that makes them feel good to believe. This is not how logic works. You can't just declare yourself to be right because you really want to be right, therefore you have to be right. That's why we ask for evidence, not the ridiculously irrational philosophical arguments that don't stand up to a moment's critical scrutiny. But he promises that he does have evidence, so let's see what he can pony up.
So, the first part of this argument says that the universe is in fact fine-tuned, and it talks about the most likely explanations for why this fine-tuning occurs.
No, it makes a bald and unevidenced claim for which you have not produced any evidence or justification. Then it just picks out several options, including the one that you really want to be true. Then it simply tosses away the two that were just there as placeholders in favor of the one that you want to be true, yada yada yada. This is why these philosophical arguments aren't at all impressive. They cater to the religious mindset, not the rational one. I could do the same thing to argue for anything. X is true even if there's no reason to think that X is true, and the reason that X is true is A, B, or C. Let's arbitrarily dismiss A and B, declaring C to be the right answer. What did we just do? We wasted our time, that's what. This doesn't actually accomplish anything.
So, the way we know that the universe is fine-tuned for life is that there are certain minimum requirements for life to exist.
Wrong. You have no idea what that actually is. What you're really talking about here is human life, not life, our life. But again, this is all about the emotional comfort provided by Christianity, not seeking the facts regardless of where the facts lead. It's absurdly obvious that the universe was not optimized for life or our life or any kind of life, because the overwhelming majority of the universe isn't conducive to our survival. We've got 8 planets in our solar system. How many of those can support our form of life? 1. How much of our planet can support our form of life? Well, very little without technological development. 71% of the planet is covered in water, which we cannot live in. There are huge portions of the planet that we simply could not survive in without technological aid. You've got a really weird idea of what designed for life might look like. That's just not what we see.
In order for these requirements to be met, the physical constants, for example gravity, and the ratios between these constants must fit within precise ranges.
And here's where you're about to go entirely wrong, which I guess is no surprise, but I'll explain it first, then I'll let you go down the insanity rabbit hole afterwards. See, you're entirely misunderstanding the way reality works. The universe wasn't built for us. I know it gives you a warm fuzzy to think that it was, but you're just wrong. We developed as a result of the conditions that happened to appear in our universe. Had the conditions been different, we would have evolved in a different way if life had even been possible under different universal constants. We are the way that we are because the universe is the way the universe is, not the other way around. But again, this is what happens when you pick your destination before you look at the evidence. This is Christians saying, well, I want to be important, and then spinning things so that they are.
If these constants were outside of these given ranges, the universe would be inhospitable for life existing.
No, not necessarily. Now, our form of life? Maybe. But any life? You have no way of knowing that. It's just another empty claim because you've got an ego and you're not afraid to flaunt it. It's why we spend so much time rolling our eyes at these asinine assertions.
The constants mentioned when regarding fine-tuning are not predetermined physical laws, but rather constants that were determined when the universe came into existence.
Yes, that is true. And over billions of years, we evolved because the constants happen to support life. There could be billions of other planets out there where life evolved too. We just don't know at the moment. But the religious, they want to stand in the middle of the field with the ball and then move the goalposts past it. The religious aren't interested in the facts. They're interested in their feelings. They start with their own emotional comfort, then they reinterpret the facts, at least the facts that they can hammer into shape, to fit their pre-existing narrative. The facts that don't fit, well, they just pretend those don't exist. That is not a rational way to look at the world.
There are numerous examples of fine-tuning. For example, take the weak nuclear force constant. If it was larger, too much hydrogen would convert into helium at the Big Bang, and the stars would convert too much matter into the heavy elements, which would make life impossible for it to exist.
Not life, our life. Get it right.
If the constants were smaller, too little helium would be produced from the Big Bang, and stars would convert too little matter into heavy elements, making life, again, impossible.
Still not right, because he's just assuming that our life is the intended life, and then he's cooking the figures to account for his unsupported and emotionally based assertion. If the conditions of the universe were different, we might not exist. But some other form of life might. We don't know. The entire argument is fallacious to its core.
Or, for example, take the expansion rate of the universe. If the expansion rate was larger, no galaxies would be able to form. But if it was smaller, the universe would collapse back on itself before stars were even formed.
Which, again, only means something when you take a pre-existing belief system and try to wrap the facts around it. You're not interested in the evidence. You're cherry-picking ideas to get you where you want to go, and then insisting that that's how it was all intended to turn out. I think the late, great Douglas Adams had it right when he said,
"We always ask ourselves why, because we look for intention around us, because we always we do something with intention. You know, we boil an egg in order to eat it. So we look at the rocks and we look at the trees and we wonder what intention is here, even though it doesn't have intention. So we think, so what did this person who made this world intend it for? And this is the point where you think, well, it fits me very well. You know, the caves and the forests and the stream and the mammoths. He must have made it for me. I mean, there's no other conclusion you can come to. And it's rather like a puddle waking up one morning. I know they don't normally do this, but allow me, I'm a science fiction writer. A puddle wakes up one morning and thinks, this is a very interesting world I find myself in. It fits me very neatly. In fact, it fits me so neatly, I mean, really precise, isn't it? It must have been made to have me in it. And the sun rises, and he's continuing to narrate the story about this hole being made to have him in it. And the sun rises, and gradually the puddle is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And by the time the puddle ceases to exist, it's still thinking, it's still trapped in this idea that the hole was there for it. And if we think the world is here for us, we will continue to destroy it in the way that we've been destroying it.
These are just two examples of the many constants we see with the fine-tuning,
neither of which stand up to any kind of critical scrutiny. They are based on emotional insistence, not intellectual credibility. It's what happens when you start with the premise that your beliefs are true, then everything has to be twisted to fit into your preconceived notions, rather than taking the evidence on its own and finding out what conclusions it demonstrably supports. This is where Christians go entirely wrong. What else is new?
So now that it has been established that the universe is in fact fine-tuned.
No, you're wrong. You haven't established anything of the sort. You've claimed it. You've misinterpreted the data. You've cherry-picked the parts that you can use to justify your position and ignored all the rest. And now you're declaring victory for a race that you haven't bothered to run. But you won't understand that, will you?
It's important to realize that there are three main explanations for why the universe is so fine-tuned. These are chance, law, or design.
Even if we agreed, for the sake of argument, that the universe was fine-tuned in some way, there are many, many, many possible explanations. And even if there were three, The only way to rationally choose between the three is to actually prove the correct one, assuming one is correct, with objective evidence, reason, and logic. You don't just get to dismiss the ones you don't like and assume that whatever is left over must be correct. You know, for people who push philosophy, it's amazing how many Christians have no clue how it actually works.
There are some other theories, but these are the three most common ideas.
Which doesn't actually mean anything. It doesn't matter if it's common. It only matters if it's demonstrably correct. You ought to get on that.
The first theory is that by chance the fine-tuning of the universe occurred.
There is still no fine-tuning evidence, but let's look at that. The physical constants of the universe could have, I guess in theory, been just about anything. Now, we have no other universes to study, so we can't really say. Maybe for reasons that we don't currently understand, what we got is all that could have been. Not because of some magical God figure, but because that's just how physics at the very base level operates. We just don't know. But for the moment, let's just assume that it was a roll of the cosmic dice. We just got lucky. The universe happened to have the kind of properties that made our form of life possible. It also likely made many other forms of life impossible, so I guess they weren't as lucky as we were. Carbon-based life arose because it was physically possible for it to do so, and because one variant of carbon-based life happened to gain sentience and have an unwarranted ego, it starts to demand that everything was created just for it. Just like the puddle. This is the most likely explanation based on the evidence that we see and what we know at present. But that doesn't make him feel good, and it gets in the way of his overactive ego, so he'll just throw all of that away.
The second theory is that because of natural law, the fine-tuning of the universe occurred.
You'd have to define what you mean by natural law in this context. It tends to be something that the religious just toss around vague explanations for without any rational reason to take them seriously. I don't even know how to respond to that without more context, so I guess we'll just let it go for the moment.
And the final theory is that the universe is fine-tuned because there is a designer behind the fine-tuning.
Which is completely unsupported, but it fits into your emotionally comforting narrative, so you're just going to go with it. Now, of course, this says nothing about what this designer is, but the religious simply assume that it's going to be their God because that's what they want it to be. Why couldn't it be some extra-universal scientist doing an experiment in a lab somewhere? Why couldn't it be some evil entity that wanted to promote suffering for poor living creatures in their petri dish? These are all equally valid explanations, given the narrative, but they don't want to talk about that. Nope, it's got to be their God. And that's not defensible.
Which of these theories makes the most sense? We'll look at that in the next video. So if you're reviewing this playlist, you can keep it rolling. But for now, this is it. I'm Zack, this is Adherent Apologetics, and I will see you guys next time.
Of the options that were given, only chance actually makes any sense. It's the only one that you can get to without pre-existing biases getting in the way. It's the only one supported by any data. You're presupposing design because your religious beliefs require it, not because the evidence inherently leads there. I know I point out the lack of honesty in the religious position a lot, but this is a perfect example. This is pure confirmation bias. You want your beliefs to be true, so you insist that only those things that lead to your beliefs are valid. And you can't see that that's what you're doing. Muslims do the same thing for their beliefs. Hindus, they do the same thing for their beliefs. Anti-vaxxers do the same thing, as do flat earthers, as do Scientologists and all the rest. They start with the assumption that they've got it all right based on their feelings. Then they make sure, consciously or subconsciously, that any set of data gets spun in such a way that their position comes out on top. And this is why science doesn't work that way. All experiments must be repeatable by those who don't share your preconceived notions. But for the religious, that doesn't matter, and it certainly doesn't work. Once we recognize what you're doing wrong and remove your inherent biases and just look at the data dispassionately, it's funny, but things don't go your way. And that's because what you're doing is all wrong. But you don't care, do you? Because this isn't about the facts. It's about rationalizing your way to your feelings. And that's just absolutely ridiculous.
Bum